Today we'll go over how to take this nice city that is in a pretty good spot, improve it, show some things that we can do to kind of improve the way the buildings are, move them a little bit closer and improve things overall. And the big thing is, that's right, we're finally adding in the partitioning. So I can show you guys how to partition the city so you get something like this. Of course, you can control the distance at which things pop in and out. So that way, if you're doing a very large city, you do not need to actually load in the entire thing. You just need to load in the part that you need just around the player. So with that, let me show you guys how it's all set up. Before we jump into it though, I do want to make a big warning update. Let you guys know the zone graph plugin that I showed off and included for free in the last video when I implemented it. That version, if you downloaded it at that point in time and you update PCG-EX, it will no longer be working because it's broken. But I was talking with the creator of PCG-EX, Tim, and he's going to try to provide me with the updated zone graph plugin. So I will just keep updating that link. So when PCG-EX gets an update, I'll try to make sure I also can get a updated version for you guys so you can continue to use it. Basically, if it gets out of date, you update PCG-EX without having the newest one, it will say that it is not compatible, your project won't start. If that happens, you just remove the plugin from your plugins folder and you can launch into it. And whenever you add it back in, it will just need to be a regeneration and you'll be back to how it was. So it's not going to break your project, but you just won't be able to use that part of it while you don't have the plugin, of course. So just want to give you guys a heads up. For that, let's jump into the improvements that have been made, and I'm going to show you guys how to make. Because I want to do the improvements to the generation first, and then we'll do the PCG partitioning kind of in that order. So let me show you. The first thing we're going to do is change one thing that we had when we originally had dead ends. And that is this path split. Because originally, dead ends otherwise would have all the buildings and everything going around it, and I just didn't want that. It's nothing wrong with it. You can absolutely have it. So if there's a dead end, it'll automatically place the buildings at angles and whatnot. In my case, I didn't want it, so I put it in. But now, because of Zone Graph can't allow actual dead ends, we can just disable it and get a much better result. And you can just select and press E to disable a node. The one reason I'm saying disable instead of remove it is so if you ever want to bring it back, you just re-enable it. For demonstration though, we have 231 buildings here. If I go ahead and disable it, we go from 231 to 259. You can see the buildings here, especially over here, they're a lot better. We're not getting as many gaps here. You can see the buildings don't really fit very well, but with this, we're getting a bit better result. Basically what this is doing, if I go ahead and debug this offset, it's making every single one of these one path. So this is a little bit difficult to see. So what I'm going to do for demonstration is I'm going to drag out of here and do filter data by index. And then inside filter, I will use a debug. And then on the filter data by index, I'm just going to say index 0. And because I think we need to make it a little bigger, I'm going to do absolute of a size 15, or if not 20. So this is index 0. This is kind of the outside, but you can see it is one continuous line. If I change the index here to be 1, you'll see it is the entire section here. Previously, if I changed this to use this node, the split one, you could see, well, it's been split. So we only got part of this. In a sense, instead of one continuous one all the way around, it is also cutting up these guys, which gets us slightly worse results, especially since we're using grammar. Grammar likes to place buildings randomly. And if your points are basically only 1 or 2 points in your kind of spline, you're not going to be able to get a good like ratio setup if you wanted to. So by having it all kind of connect within that block or within the outside or whatever it is, we get a much nicer result. And that means that we have buildings also placed much better. Hence why we got more buildings. So I'll go ahead and disable this. And I'll give myself a little comment here just so I remember. I'll just say something like 4 dead ends, but it needs a little bit of tweak. Because I think even if we keep the dead ends, I'll want to modify the settings here afterward. So that helps tremendously. The next thing I want to adjust is the distance that all the buildings are away from the actual road here. A lot of them are just way too big, especially once you start looking here. I really want these buildings closer. The problem we start running into, if we change them to be closer, which is on this clipper to offset node, controlled by this variable, global building offset from road, right? We're offsetting from the road, and this is how much we're offsetting by. Let's see what happens when we change this global building offset from road from 1500 to 1000. Well, we lose a lot of buildings also. And not only that, but we're now starting to have buildings on the road completely, because the pivot of the buildings themselves is in the middle. It's not actually at the doors. So the easy solution to this is to take any building you want to use and move the pivot of that building to the front entrance of the building. So for example, right here. Now I've done this for a few buildings. You can see this is the original one. Its pivot is right in the middle center of it. And then I have a new one here where I've changed it. Now, all you need to do to change a pivot on an object is the top left, change the selection mode to modeling, go to X form, hit edit pivot, and now you can just move the pivot wherever you'd like. I just place it basically at the doorways of all of these, and then I hit accept. And that puts the pivot right here at the doorway instead of having it in the middle. The other thing you need to do for all of these is on the one that you change your pivot to. In my case, I duplicated it, so I have the old and the new for demonstration, but you can of course change it on the original as long as you're aware that you're changing it for all of them for the future. You're going to want to open this. Because we changed the pivot, the socket for the front of the door is no longer in the right place. But that also means that because we have the pivot now at the door center here, we can zero out the location of the socket to basically be right up against the door, which is now at 0, 0, 0, which is a lot more convenient as well. And you want to do this for all the meshes. This is going to improve things quite a bit. So now we will be able to actually control the distance from the road to the building versus having to push it further depending on the building size, etc. But once you have this for all your buildings that you need, you're going to want to select your district curves, mine are up here, and then just swap out all your meshes to the one with the pivot if you made a new one, or you'll just need to regenerate. So in my case, I am using new meshes, so I'm going to go ahead and just swap them out by just going through all of these and swapping them out for the one that's as the pivot adjusted. And here we go. Now I've swapped it out. I also included one other building here for the skyscraper area, so that's a lot better. And we can actually push this even further by typing in a global offset of 800. Of course, when we do that, we start running into issues where, yeah, all the buildings are just not spawning right and they're not being aligned right. And we need to clean some stuff up. There's still a little bit to adjust here for this to work. The reason all of this is kind of a mess right now is because we're still using the cut splines for this offset. So instead of using cut splines, I'm going to use the original spline right here. Because over here, I'm still removing things that are overlapping the roads, and that's all I really need. And the cut splines doesn't have the intersections, so I'm going to just use this stuff here. And we already have a sampled road splines we can use. So I'm going to right click and grab my sampled road splines. I'm going to change the cut splines for the sampled road splines and make sure to re-plug it into the offset. And now here, instead of scaling it by 3, I'm going to change the scale of this to 2.2. And honestly, we can just keep X at 1, so that is the forward, or you can globally scale it all by 2.2. If I go ahead and debug this, you can see it is now the size of the road, which is why I'm using 2.2. It's not perfectly, we can go a little higher, honestly, but you can see where this is going. It's now just the size of the road. We do have issues like this happening for whatever reason, so we need to fix it so these kind of buildings don't appear behind other buildings. This is happening from inside the loop grammar by district. If I go ahead and open it up, it's all fine here. In fact, I can add a debug here, and you'll see all of the points are right up against the edge. They're not here. But for whatever reason, after we go ahead and do the create spline and then subdivide the spline with grammar, we get this. So what we can do is, using basically the points that we had, the street points that we plugged in, which are these that are offset, we can say, hey, make sure these buildings are overlapping here, because this is where we want the actual buildings to be. We can do that very easy by just taking this intersection and just duplicating it and placing it after the subdivide spline and before the out. So hey, once you've placed them, you just double check that they're still here, and you just double click here to add a reroute node and use that as our source 1. And now you'll see, hey, the building's gone. Perfect. Yeah, this is without it. You can see here and here, you have the buildings going way too far out, and with it, problem solved. Now we have some other problems like this. This building is just way too angled. The reason it's way too angled is because we we aren't sampling the intersections when we're placing the buildings and telling it to align to something. So let's go ahead and adjust that. This is happening because we're using cut splines for the spline sampler's nearest point. So instead of doing the cut splines create spline, I'm going to go ahead and kill this. And I'm going to grab the original spline data sample that we're using. I'm not getting this because we need to create a different spacing. So this way I just use the actual node that has everything configured, drop it into here. And this spline sample, if you recall, is set to 100. So that way the buildings are a little bit better in terms of like where they're facing. I can make them even straighter by making it something 50, but make sure if you do it on this nearest point one, I recommend also doing it on here because this is where the path is going. So we're going to use the same thing here. Instead of this create spline and cut splines, we're just going to plug in this data here. And you want to make sure the distance increment on both of these is the same. So if I make them both 50, we should be good. And you can see here, hey, that's a lot better. In fact, we actually got a few more buildings because they're no longer angled in weird ways. Now the road here is angled weirdly, but the buildings are fine. The last thing we kind of need to fix up is now the buildings that are just a little bit overhanging. Because of course we could have a point picked right here where it's spawning it, and we're choosing the entrance. We don't know how wide the building is. So it's very possible that it just won't fit because of how wide it is. So we need to make sure that all of these buildings are cut out from the road area. But we can only do that after we know the size of the buildings. Thankfully, we're already getting the size of the buildings because we're doing a self-pruning to kind of remove any overlaps already. So we have the bounds and we can use that. Right here, we have the static mesh spawner, and right before that, we have the cell pruning, but the main one is we have the bounds for mesh. So we actually have the bounds, and using this bounds, we can check if they overlap the road. So what I'm going to do is just take all of this and kind of scooch it to the right. And after this bounds for mesh, I'm going to use a difference node. This difference node is going to be set to binary. We want to cut everything out, and I'm going to plug this all the way through. And again, I'm going to be using the original sampled road splines. I'm going to right-click, sampled road splines, and we just need a bounds modifier here, because just like here, we basically need to grab and multiply them by 2.2, just like we did on this one. So I'll go ahead and scale it to 2.2. We only need to care about the Y and Z being scaled to 2.2, and that is going to go into the differences here. And that goes ahead and removes that extra point. So this is without it, and this is with it. Again, same thing here. You can see on this one, it goes ahead and removes it, and it's able to place another one here now because there's nothing interfering. Now, there will be cases when it's actually fine, like over here, you can see because it's slightly curved, it's going to get this guy here when I enable it. Unfortunately, we can't do much about those individual buildings just because the actual difference is not perfectly lined up. As you recall from a previous part when we did the driveways, we had to adjust the actual bounds to be much smaller than the driveways actually are for the trees and everything to appear next to the driveways, because it would not cut out exactly where the bounds were, it would cut out a little bit extra. So you can play around with these values and see which one works best for you. If we take a look here now, you can see how there's now 2 rows of buildings. If you recall, we had only one building here because of the large offset. So now we have far fewer vegetations because we have far more packed buildings. They're much nicer altogether. With these changes, we actually can go and select the district splines, and we can play around with the extra spacing. Because right now we're at 100 of extra spacing, and this is spawning 274 buildings. If I do 0, we actually get 281, because now they're right up against each other and they could fit fine because, very importantly, we're no longer cutting them. So it's a bigger spline, which means it's very good about now packing them in much closer. So we don't necessarily need the extra spacing. Now, it's still good to have because for some buildings, you might want to have spacing specifically. For example, for the suburban, I do want some spacing. I don't think they should be touching. So I'll give it something like 50 to have a little bit of spacing for this. But for example, for downtown, for this area, we're 281 with 100 extra spacing. If I do 0, in my case, it's still 281. But one thing you might notice, if I put it back to 100, right here, you can see these buildings at 0, right? There's more of them fit, and they're much nicer. This is more of what you kind of expect probably of downtown, where the buildings are right next to each other. There's no gaps. Of course, there's going to be a few when buildings don't fit and things of that nature, but that is much nicer. Again, we can go through. Same thing with this one. We can change the extra spacing here to be down to 50, get a few more buildings in. And here on this commercial area, its extra spacing is actually 200. So we're at 283 here. And if I do 0 spacing, we're at 285. So we only got a little bit. So here you might want to play around with a bit of spacing. It's mostly to do with these curves. The curves here are really what's causing causing the spacing to be helpful or not. If it was more straight, I could pretty much do 0 all the way through. But here is 285, at 50 is 287, 100, 285, 150, 285. So really at 50 spacing, we're getting the most. So that's what I'll do. I'll keep it at 50. Now you might notice that I still have the building here like this. It wasn't actually pruned, despite us using the intersection over here on the inside. Because if you recall, if I go ahead and debug this, it's not touching. The points are right here. It is considerably further away. There should be no reason for this building to spawn, and yet it has. Like the difference, the intersection is not exact. So it's not a perfect solution right now. I'll probably play around with a few options down the line. For now, I'm going to say it's good enough, but it's on my mental note to potentially fix this down the line. I have a few ideas, but we still need to play around with kind of the fact that the values just aren't as exact as we'd like them to be. For now, though, I feel like the buildings are much better off. They're now much tighter together. We don't have as many trees. We can always add parks in the actual grammar system. Don't forget, you could just add that as a module and it will spawn it. But in general, I think this is a much improved setup to what it was. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and actually set up hierarchical generation for this. So we don't have to load in this entire thing all the time. To do that is not very difficult, actually. The first thing you want to do is go into the outliner and select the PCG world actor. In here, you're going to want to change the serialization mode to always serialize. And you want to turn on treat editor viewport as generation source. The reason we want to do that is so that way, when you move around the actual editor world, you will see the changes. You'll see what I mean shortly. We also want to select the actual PCG graph itself, and down if we see under PCG components settings, we see is partitioned and generation trigger. We want to change the generation trigger to generate a runtime, and we want to turn on is partitioned. Now we're going to run into a few issues right away. First of all, it looks like the trees are now over buildings, and it's still not actually cutting into pieces. Don't worry, we'll take care of all of that. The first thing is let's make sure that this is actually loading in pieces, and the actual graph is set up for partitioning. So here in the main graph with nothing selected in the detail panel here, I can turn on use hierarchical generation. I'm going to turn that on. I'm going to change the HiGen default grid size to unbounded. The reason I'm doing unbounded is because we cannot partition mesh splines. And you can actually see that if you just change the unbounded, let's say to 12,800. Look what happens to all of the road splines. Yeah, it just does not work with this at all. But, you can see now the rest of it is all working. So because it doesn't work with the actual mesh splines, we're going to have the HiGen default grid size to be unbounded, which effectively means that there is no partitioning at all. But we can now specify that we want partitioning on the buildings, on the trees, on the lamps, but not on the actual roads. Let's go ahead and get started with the buildings. This is the spawner for the building. So I'm going to take all of this. And again, I'm going to just move it over to the right so I have some more room. And before the static mesh spawner for the buildings, we're going to need a few things. Starting with this node called change grid size. So we're using unbounded, but we can tell it that everything past this point will not be unbounded. It will be using this grid size for the hierarchical generation. I'm going to set mine to something like 6400. And now we need to make sure that it's filtering per grid size. So from this out, we just need to use an intersection. And the grid cell volume is the source one. Basically filter it and then only display what's there. Now it is possible in this scenario that you have no points in this location at all because it's partitioning everything. And maybe there's just no buildings in that partition. So to make sure that we don't have any empty data, I'm just drag out and search for remove, and we'll grab a remove empty data node. Now at this point, I want to already convert it to points because now we're getting the spatial data output. So instead, I'm dragging out of out, search for 2 point. So we get a 2-point conversion, and that's the one that's going to go into this remove empty data. So we get a point conversion out on the other side as well. So now we've removed the empty data. This can go back into the static mesh spawner. So I'll go ahead and plug that all the way through. So effectively now the buildings are partitioned by this. And we can see that because, well, there we go. They're partitioned. Unfortunately, though, all the trees were relying, well, on actually having buildings there to cut things out. So, first step is done. Let's take care of the trees. The trees are going to need the same thing. So I'm just going to take this change grid size, intersection, remove empty data. I'm going to take it, go to the trees over here. After this difference node, I'm going to duplicate it over here. The difference will go into this change grid size. And then this remove empty data will go into the static mesh spawner, just like so. Okay, so now the trees are also disappearing, but they're not actually being cut out where they're supposed to be because, again, it wasn't designed to cut out based off of this distance. And by the way, this going in and out, that you're seeing generate and not generate, that's what this world actors treat editor viewport as generation source. That's what this does. If I turn this off, I would never see anything. As you can see, nothing's happening without this checkbox. So very important when you're working to have it on. The reason this is happening is because we're cutting it out after partitioning. So we're doing the partitioning on the buildings, and then we see that's where we're getting this difference of these buildings. But we don't actually need to do it here. We have the self-pruning node right here. So we know that we already got the bounds, and we've only kept what's needed. So instead of this, I can take from the self-pruning and plug that into the difference. So instead of after the static mesh spawner, we're going after the self-pruning because of the bounds already being set. And now we take a look. Hey, this building no longer has trees going inside of it. Well, that's much better. And so now we have the buildings and the trees coming in and out at the same time. Fantastic. That is working really well. The next one to do, of course, is the lamps. We don't need all of those being generated everywhere. I'll go ahead and take the change grid size and the intersection and this conversion node. I'll just deploy it down here. We really don't need the actual pruning node. The reason we need it over the buildings is because we were doing things with it later, creating the driveways. Here we're spawning it, which is the same thing, by the way, with the trees. You don't need the remove empty data node there. I just want to show that you can use it, or you can choose to not use it for those. The main one you definitely need it for is the buildings one because of driveways. For this though, we just need to put it basically near the end. So I'll just do it after this nearest point for its facing, and I'll put it right here into the transfer point static mesh spawner. And now take a look. You can see there's the actual lamps now also coming in when we need them. You can see over there, no lamps. Fly closer, lamps. Fantastic. So that's working really well now. Now you might be wondering, it seems like going unbounded first and then only converting after all the math is being done is working really well. Would that not work for the roads? Calculate everything first and then partition it? Well, I can show you what happens. Let's take our same change grid size intersection. Let's take all of this. We're going all the way up here to the create spline and the spline mesh. I'll go ahead and just detach this, plug that through, plug this through, and hey, that's, it's partitioning it. Look, it's working. It's working. Of course, we do the intersections, but that's working. There's absolutely no issues anywhere. Yeah, absolutely no issues. That's definitely not a cut. The reason why you're seeing these cuts is because those are the partition lines. So yes, we don't have the same problem we had before. But even with this, spline meshes aren't designed to work with partitions like this. When a partition cuts off the points, it no longer knows what it connects to. So imagine a spline here going all the way through, and you have a partition right here. That is one partition and another partition. Well, basically, this connection is broken. So without this connection, the spline ends here and the spline ends here. It doesn't know that, hey, we should put another point here and do this extra distance. There's no way for it to know. And so that's why we create these gaps. So unfortunately, spline mesh is not going to be an option. Now, if you used a more custom setup where you spawned the actual static meshes instead of splines, you could get away with it. If you had like a perfect gridded system, you could get away with pure static meshes that just automatically scale to whatever size they need to be. It's not that difficult to set up. If you guys want me to show you, I can later on. Just let me know in the comments below. But as soon as you want any kind of curvature, of course, then we start running into issues because now we need spline meshes, which run into that issue. But even then, hey, we got a partition city. Things are spawning in as we need them. All the buildings are much closer. It feels a lot better. Things are working real well. Now, if you're wondering what happened to the moving cars and zone graph and why you haven't been seeing it, they're here and they're moving. All still moving. Now, I'm in simulate mode, which is why it's thinking that the character's in the middle. Hence, it's not going off of the editor distance. If I go back here, of course, we get the editor one. And this is how it works in the package build. But freaking Tim, he got me a updated runtime version where he disabled an error that was popping up. Just disabled the check for it. And it works. And not only does it work here, I confirmed it works in the package build. This is a packaged build right now that you're looking at. And yeah, I didn't fix up any of the intersection issues, but this is the package build. So you can see here, all moving, all fine. And you can see here, the actual partitioning and everything is working here at runtime. Still, I'm going to look into custom traffic, but nevertheless, I think this is pretty freaking awesome. So I think we should all congratulate Tim for being so freaking awesome with his PCGEX and supplying us with the zone graph. Of course, the updated PCGEX with this runtime capability is available on the same link as last time. I'll make sure to re-add the link in the description of this video as well. I'll still have the warning there, but you'll be able to grab it, and it should work with the current PCGEX that's out, and a runtime, and in a package build. Freaking amazing. But if you'd like to try out this project for yourself, it'll be available on my Patreon, where you can join these wonderful people in supporting what I do. It really means a lot. And if you'd like to join the community, the link to the Discord and everything else is in the description below. And if you're looking for more awesome PCG tutorials, maybe something not city related, check out this one over here to continue your PCG learning journey.